Good morning. I'm Aaron Brown, lead pastor here at Woods Chapel. And a few years ago, my youngest daughter went through a country music phase. So she'd get in my car and she would say, "Daddy, turn it to Kicks 102.5." And so in that year, I listened to more country music than I had ever listened to in my whole life. You see, I was raised in a home where classical music is what we listened to. My father was a classically trained musician. He was a professor at the time CMSU and trained other classical musicians. So for us to go through our country phase was really kind of cool, which is why I'm wearing what I'm wearing today all the way down to my boots. And yes, this is a Hollister country shirt, so it doesn't really count. I know. But, here's the thing that I learned about country music pretty quickly. And if you're a fan, you know this, that country music, so many of the songs tell really good stories, right? And so many of them weave faith into those stories. So many of them have these really, pithy sayings that are just beautiful and kind of stick in your brain. And some of the country songs are kind of nasty and you just turn those off. But there are themes in there that are pretty powerful. And there's one song that it just kind of jumped out at me when my daughter was going through this phase. It's a song by Chris Janson called "Buy Me a Boat." And it really fits what we're talking about today. So I want you to hear the first minute of that song. So we all know money can't buy us happiness. It cannot buy us love. But we all have that dream of a rich uncle that'll kick the bucket and leave us a pile of money like Warren Buffett. And it can't buy us happiness, but it could buy a boat and it could buy a truck to pull it and a Yeti 110 filled with silver bullets. And it's funny to hear Pastor say that, isn't it? But we think sometimes that money can buy us happiness, but will it? We're going to explore that today. So let me just ask you, when it comes to money, do you ever struggle with money? Don't raise your hands or anything like that, but think about it. Do you ever struggle with money? Because most of us do at some point. Maybe not, right now. Maybe it was sometime in the past. We might struggle at some point in the future, but it's pretty common for folks to struggle with money at different points in our lives. I'll tell you a little bit about my wife and I, Janet and I. We got married almost 29 years ago, and when we got married, we were beginning at the bottom, because she was a beginning teacher and started with a beginning teacher salary, and I was starting off as an associate pastor, beginning pastor salary, and we had barely enough to live off of at that point, and what strained us a lot is that we had debt. We had student loans, we had car loans, and we had a little bit of credit card debt, and so it was hard making ends meet. In fact, we didn't really have enough to make ends meet, especially if something big happened, and what we would do if we had like a car problem or we had a health thing that we had to pay for is we got on the phone to Mom and Dad and said, "Mom and Dad, can you help us out?" And that was just kind of how we lived for that first year. And most of us have been there at some point. Maybe some of you are there right now. It can cause a huge amount of stress if we're in that position. After our first year of marriage, Janet and I moved to Joplin, and I started as a senior pastor. I went from being an associate pastor to a senior pastor, and it was a bump in salary for me, but Janet had to quit her job in order for us to move, and so our income actually went down significantly for, probably 6 or 8 months. Then she got a full-time teaching gig in Neosho, and all of a sudden, it was like, we had 2 incomes that had increased significantly, and we were dinks at that point. You know what a dink is? Dual income, no kids. Oh my gosh. Oh, baby. And so in a few years, our student loans were paid off, and our credit cards were paid off, and our car loans were paid off. We had no debt whatsoever. We were saving money. We could buy a few nicer things. And this was that time period too when credit card companies were sending you applications every single day, and the whole idea was you can get whatever you want today and pay it off tomorrow. The whole idea was simply that you're going to have more money in the future, guaranteed. So live like you will live in the future. But what people find is that leads to a whole other kind of financial stress, doesn't it? You're digging yourself a financial hole, living off tomorrow's income today. Your standard of living is higher than it should be. You find yourself stressed out because you bought a nicer car than you should probably afford. You bought a bigger house than you should probably afford. But the bank said, "Oh yeah, we'll give you enough to pay for that house." So, every month, even though you have enough to live on, paying for that standard of living stresses you all the time. That's some of us in the room right now, I'd imagine. There's another place of stress when it comes to money. For Janet and I, the last 20 years or so, Janet and I, we have not really had to worry about money on a month-to-month basis. For most of our adult lives, we have been out of debt. And one of the big reasons for that is because we always lived in a parsonage. That's a church-owned home. And that was just part of our salary, was a church-owned home. But what we did is that we tried to set aside a house payment along there. That was part of our savings. And so we were able to live debt-free. We don't live debt-free now. We were frugal, though, and we could eat out when we wanted to. We could buy something when we needed it. But here's the thing. When it came to tax time, I remember having this idea all the time of sitting down, looking at our income and our deductions and the bottom line and thinking, where in the heck did it all go? And turning to my wife, Janet, and saying, what did you do with all our money? And her looking at me and saying, what did you do with all our money? And you see, here's the thing. Because we had financial margin in our lives, even though we were frugal, we'd lose track of the little ways that it goes away. You know what I'm talking about? Just $5 here and $25 here and $50 there. It's not that we didn't have enough. It's that we could have done so much more with what we had if we had been intentional about it. I mean, we were able to write some big checks, in the past to Nicaragua housing projects and to capital campaigns. And we were giving away 15% of our income, but we still wondered, I couldn't help but wondered, what we could have done if we would have been paying closer attention. And that's a different kind of struggle around money. There's a fourth struggle that I want to mention. Some of you may be in a place where you've accumulated a large amount of money because you were frugal and you worked hard and you were careful and you made good decisions. Or maybe along with all that, you inherited some money, but now you have a hard time letting go of it. You have a hard time being generous because guarding that money has almost become an obsession. Yet that's another kind of struggle with money, going from being frugal to being miserly. You see, in all of these stages and places of life, there are two main problems, or two things that need to be held in tension: desire and discipline. Desire and discipline. Can you say those two words out loud with me? Ready? 1, 2, 3. Desire and discipline. I'm pretty sure that all of us struggle with this at some point. Our biblical ancestors struggled with desire, and it's just woven into our human nature to want things. And I don't know what they wanted back, 2,000 years ago or 5,000 years ago, but I'm sure it was like, honey, it's time for us to upgrade the goat. I sure wish we could have a better camel, or nicer clothes or better sandals or something. They didn't have Amazon or eBay or Etsy or the mall or Facebook Marketplace, but they had desires for sure, a lot like what we face. But that desire we have for more, the desire we have for better, has to be balanced. It has to be met with discipline. Desire has to be balanced with discipline. And the challenge is that lots of us have learned only one side of the equation, the desire side. So we gotta get this right. We've got to work on this, especially as followers of Jesus, because desire without discipline leads to disaster. It leads to a place where we are not free. It leads to a place of stress and anxiety. And to make things worse, of course, we live in an economy that's based on consumer spending. We have this cycle that's just built into the system, right? Jobs are created when we spend money on things. That's the machine we live in. For consumer spending to increase, you've got to want more next year than you have this year. And the stuff that you have, well, you got to get dissatisfied with it. So it's either planned obsolescence, so that stuff just doesn't last, or you've got to be convinced that it's no longer satisfying to have the stuff that you currently have. That's the model we live in our country. And so many other countries live the same way. So back to that song we started with. Money can't buy me happiness, but it can buy me a boat and a truck to pull it and a Yeti 110 filled with silver bullets. When I first heard that song, I did not know what a Yeti 110 was. So how many of you know what a Yeti 110 is? Raise your hands. How many of you don't know what a Yeti 110 is? Well, I'm about to tell you, and you're going to want one. So here's a picture of a Yeti 110. You can see it right there on screen. It is a 110 quart cooler, and it will keep things cold for a week, guaranteed. It will fit 74 cans of your favorite beverages and ice. And if you want the best of the best, this is the coolest cooler you can buy. And I didn't know that I wanted a Yeti cooler till I listened to that song. And it created a desire within me. And I went to the Yeti site, and I found out this is super important, that the Interagency Grizzly Bear Committee has certified this cooler is grizzly bear proof. I watched a video of a grizzly trying to get in this thing, and it couldn't. I mean, how cool is that? So at home, we've got a cooler, and it's a Coleman cooler that we were given at our wedding. I think we were given at our wedding. We may have upgraded to an Igloo, but it probably cost $25 at the time. And so I'm having this imaginary conversation with my wife, and it goes something like this. Hey, baby, Janet, we gotta get a Yeti cooler. And she's like, well, what's a Yeti cooler? And it's like, it's the coolest cooler in the world. It can keep things cold for a week. And she's like, well, usually we just need to keep stuff cold for a couple hours, not a week. I'm like, but we might someday need to keep things cold for a week. And she's like, well, how much is it? It's $550. Aaron, have you lost your mind? But honey, it's grizzly bear proof. I mean, that's the stuff that goes on in our brains, right? The creation of the need for things that we didn't know we even needed. The problem is that if you're in the first category that I mentioned, and when my wife and I first got married, if you're in that first category, you can't afford it in the first place. If you're in the second category, then you're borrowing from the future to pay for that today. And if you're in the third category, yes, you can afford it, and you've got the margin, and you're not borrowing from the future to do that, but you've got to think, well, what other 5 things could I do with that $550? Or what one thing could I do that might be life-changing for somebody? That's why Jesus said stuff like this. Luke 12. He said, watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed, against all kinds of desire. You could put that word in there too. For one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. And that second part of that verse is one that I think we as Christians should internalize. My life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. I got to remind myself of that constantly. And that doesn't mean that I can't have things, as long as I can afford them and I've got my priorities in line. But when you believe, hey, this thing is really going to make me happy, and it becomes the focus of your life, and that's when things go wrong. My life cannot consist in the abundance of my possessions. In another place, Jesus says it this way. No one can serve 2 masters, for you will hate one and love the other, or you will be devoted to one and despise the other. And then he gets to the heart of the matter here. You cannot serve both God and money. Only one of these can drive your life. Both of them can. Only one of these can drive your life. Money has its place, but we cannot let it become our master. Now, there's some pretty good evidence that we struggle with money in America today. I want to hit you with some statistics here that kind of help put all this in perspective and just see how you fall in this. Do you fall within the norm? Do you fall outside the norm? Financial experts say that we should be saving 10 to 15% of our paychecks, each paycheck, 10 to 15%. That primarily would go into retirement and into emergency funds, so that if you have a major car issue, you have a major health issue, you lose your job, that because you've been doing that 10 to 15%, you have that buffer, you have that margin. So 10 to 15% is what financial experts recommend. The average American saved 5.1% of their paychecks last year, rather than 10 to 15%. So I think that points to, we struggle with saving. What about debt? Well, 50% of all Americans have unsecured debt that carries over month to month. And so unsecured debt, that's your credit cards, your store cards, other small loans that we use. And the average unsecured debt per American consumer is $10,498. And that's carried over month to month to month. The average debt for student loan for 2022, $37,787. Again, I think that points to we struggle with debt. What about what we give away? So the IRS tracks that on people's tax returns, and on average, we Americans give away 4.3% of our incomes. And let me break this down because this is really interesting to me how it's broken down. Those who made $50,000 or less, they gave away 8.4% of their income. They are the second highest givers percentage-wise. Those making between $50,000 and $500,000 gave away around 4%, half as much as those $50,000 and less. So, in fact, that same percentage goes all the way up to people that have $10 million in income. So, between $50,000 and $10 million in income, people generally gave away, on average, around 4% of their income. The biggest givers, percentage-wise, are those with incomes over $10 million. They give 9.3%, or gave 9.3% away. By the way, we are by far the most generous country in the world. We have a definite culture within us of wanting to share what we have. So we're the most generous nation on the planet. We're also the richest nation on the planet, which makes me wonder, why is it that we can't save more? Why is it that we can't give more away when we clearly have the capacity? Why is it that we find ourselves battling debt and the stress that debt creates? Why have some of us gone from being frugal to being hoarders and misers? And it has to do with the two words, desire and discipline. Desire and discipline. What I want to do to make this very practical this week and the next couple weeks is look at four practices, 4 goals that balance desire and discipline. 4 goals that balance those two things within us. And it's up to you whether you want to pick these habits up or not, or these goals up. But I'm telling you, these are tried and true mechanisms that help people experience financial freedom and the joy of being able to use finances in a way that leverage good things in the lives of others. So 4 goals. The first goal is this. You might want to jot this down or take a picture up on the screen. First goal for 2023 is make a budget and live by it. And I got to admit, this is hard for me. This really is. Janet and I budget for the big stuff in our world, for our giving, for our mortgage, automatically set aside money for retirement, and when our kids were younger, and in their college savings plans. But I got to tell you, we are not very good at having a spending plan for other things like recreation, like eating out, clothes. But that is exactly where we really need to plan so that we don't waste money. The idea with budgeting is that God has given us this, and entrusted us this money, and we want to use it more wisely next year than we did in the past. So the challenge is to create a budget that includes those little things. I want to give you a website that can help. It's everydollar.com. Everydollar.com. This is a Dave Ramsey website, Financial Peace, if you've heard of them, and it gives you a free budgeting tool that you can use. You can pay a little bit per month if you want some added features, but what it'll allow you to do is set up a 2023 budget and monitor everything. It wants you to put in every expense that you have. So I encourage you to do this and see what happens. And see if it doesn't give you greater liberation and financial freedom, and track everything. That's the idea. Track everything from the drinks that we get at Quick Trip every day, and by we, I mean Janet, to the allowance we give our daughters, our weekly tithe that we give to God through the church. So that's the first goal that I would put out there for all of us Wood Chapelers to do. Everydollar.com. Or use another budget tool, whatever. It doesn't really matter, but start there. And here's what financial experts tell us. Simply by tracking your expenses, simply by tracking them, you will save about 10% of your income. Just by monitoring what comes in and what goes out. Second goal is to eliminate or make a dent in your debt. Eliminate or make a big dent in your debt. Experts recommend a few things to make this happen. If you want to eliminate debt, they say number one, first thing is to stop buying things you don't absolutely need. Just stop. Hard to do in a world that creates desire, but stop buying things you don't need. The second thing they recommend is sell things that you don't absolutely need, and then take what you're saving and take what you have gained from selling that thing and put that on your smallest debt. And put that on your smallest debt and keep adding that in. They also recommend if you're able to get a second job, take that and take everything from that second job and put it on that smallest debt. And when you pay off that smallest debt, then you keep paying that same amount to work on the next largest debt. Do you know what this is called? Anybody remember what this is called? No? The debt snowball. The debt snowball. So you are continuing to work on until you have made a big dent or are completely debt-free. And by the way, we offer a finance class. I'm not sure if it's exactly financial peace, but it's one of those every year to help people practice some of these practices and have that accountability, that sense of fun and community that can make it so much easier. You can do this. Don't tell yourself you can't. So, get out of debt and stay there. And then live below your means. This is one of the key things. Live below your means. I've been telling my kids since they were little, man, whatever your income is, I can't tell you what you're going to make in life, I don't know. But I do know this, if you live at least one level below your income, you'll be okay. Live 2 levels below your income, if at all possible, and you'll be doing great. And then one of the other key things I think in this around debt and just living frugally is find the free stuff to do in life. Focus on the free stuff. And one of the things that we talk about around here that, it's free and it's so important and it's so life-giving is relationships. It's one of the reasons we want you to be in life groups and connecting with people like that, and is to build those relationships. They're free and they are the best stuff of life. Some of the other things that are free in this world, go out and enjoy nature. We live right here in one of those beautiful areas with the lakes we have and the trails and the parks. Instead of looking to buy something or spend money on some experience, what about the beauty of the free stuff that's around? And one of the other things that's kind of cool is this trend where cheap is hip. You know what I mean? And it's kind of interesting, cheap is hip, that the generations that already know this and are practicing it are the silent generation, those born around the Great Depression, and Generation Z, Gen Z. They're the ones that seem to get this, Buy things used, share things, don't let fads define your tastes. These are some of the simple practices that can help us be frugal. Again, Jesus, Matthew 6. He said, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and vermin destroy." I love the word vermin. I don't know, vermin. And where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Again, that last line is so important. Where your treasure is, that's where your heart will be. What this is telling us is that our hearts follow treasure. Where your treasure is, your heart will go there. Where your treasure is, your heart will go there. Jesus is saying, monitor where your treasure is. The things we value most are going to be at the center of our lives. And the danger is making the constant pursuit of more and bigger and better and more expensive the center point of our lives. And Jesus is saying, no, don't do it. Don't give into that. Live differently. Seek to be the people that God wants us to be. Seek to live like God wants us to live, and to value our relationships, to value our experiences, to value nature, serving God, serving other people more than anything else. So, I got these 4 goals that I want us to look at, and hopefully you will consider for 2023. I talked about 2 of them today. Make a budget and eliminate or make a dent in your debt, and we're going to hit the next 2 goals in the next 2 weeks. Back to the song, Chris Jance's song. He wrote that song, "You Could Buy Me a Boat." It was a smash hit. He sold at least 500,000 copies of his album, and I couldn't help but wonder, what kind of boat did he buy? Here's what I found out. After selling 500,000 albums, traveling on tour across the country, Chris Janson decided not to buy a boat at all. Instead, here's what he did. He rented 3 kayaks and took his family out for a day on the lake. A Billboard magazine interviewed him, and they said, "So, Chris, your song seems to imply that if you had a boat and a truck, you'd be happy." And he said, "Listen, happiness means my family." He said, "That's off kilter relative to the song, I know, but happiness is my wife, my kids, my faith, my relationship with the Lord. That's where I find my happiness." Well, they asked him if he made $1 million on the song, what would he do with it? He said, "If I ever make $1 million with anything in my life, I'll tell you the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to buy diapers." I don't know if those are for himself or for your kids or what. He says, "As long as my family is set and secure with their livelihood, I'm happy." He said, "Money can buy a boat, but I don't even know if I want a boat. It's all about my wife and kids, and anything else is just icing on the cake. In the end, it's all about how you feel and how you wake up and if you're a good human being at the end of the day." So yes, money can buy you a boat and a truck to pull it and a Yeti 110 full of silver bullets. But money can also be an expression of your faith. And money can be a means of changing the world. Jesus is telling us, listen, money is a useful tool, but it is a terrible, terrible master. You can't serve both God and money. Wherever your treasure is, that's where your heart, your passion, your love is going to be. Those are wise words. Now, I recognize this, that people get funny when you talk about money, especially pastors and churches. But listen, Jesus talked about money and possessions more than anything else other than the kingdom of God. And he talked about it because he knew that it has the potential to wreck our lives. It has a potential to capture our hearts. Money is a good tool, but it's a terrible master. The only one worth our ultimate attention, the only one worth our ultimate love, the only one worth giving our hearts and treasure to is who? Jesus himself. Your money or your life. For today, that's the good news. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.